recently there's been talks about making a movie next year, 2025, to tell the true story of Sarah Rector's amazing life. Do you want to know why? Because during a time in which African Americans were freshly recovering from the physical and financial trauma of slavery, one lucky decision had changed this poor black girl's life forever, earning her the title of the richest Negro girl in the country. Ugh, did I just say the richest Negro girl? Nah, that was wrong. She was, in fact, the richest girl amongst black or white in the United States. At that time of her miraculous breakthrough in 1913, Sarah Rector, the daughter of Creek Indian freedmen, rose from humble beginnings in a wind-swept two-room cabin near the tiny town of Twine in Indian Territory to become the wealthiest black girl in America when she was only 11 years old. Her parents were African-American members of the Muskogee Creek Nation. It included 5 tribes who were relocated by the United States government using a combination of bribery and force from their former homelands in the southeast to what would become Oklahoma, so that new white settlers could take over their rich land. Amazingly, this inspiring story has particularly proved very true, the axiomatic adage which says, "Not all that glitters is gold." Here is just how, in Sarah Rector's case, one of the supposed rich lands in their homelands, which her family had been denied and forced out from by the U.S. government, had turned out to be quite poor and far less resourceful, in contrast to the very supposed poor land, which was allotted to them in replacement at eastern Oklahoma, which had turned out to be a gold mine. Interesting piece of work by Providence, right? Just like literally the story of Joseph in the Bible, who was envied by his elder brothers for his incessant dreams and father's love, and had conspired to kill the lad, but along the line changed their mind and sold him to an Egyptian merchant. In the end, the predicament had merely turned out to be Joseph's path into greatness. Same thing had happened here to Sarah Rector and her family, whose fate had been merely orchestrated by racial conquest, oppression, segregation, and greed. These would become the Rector's pathways to financial independence and freedom. The thing here is, in a world where the pursuit of wealth often seems like a game reserved for the fortunate few, the story of Sarah Rector would stand as an unexpected twist of fate. Born in 1902 to formerly enslaved parents in the heart of Oklahoma, Sarah's early life was marked by the struggles and limitations that accompanied her family's circumstances. However, destiny had a different plan in store for her, a plan that would transform her from a young girl facing adversity into a millionaire by the tender age of 11. At the center of this extraordinary tale lies a series of events that could easily be mistaken for a plot in a gripping novel. When a life-changing natural resource was discovered on her family's land, what began as a seemingly innocuous blessing would quickly spiral into a complex web of exploitation and greed. As corporations and individuals would seek to capitalize on her newfound wealth, Sarah would find herself navigating a world that was both thrilling and treacherous. Yet, rather than succumbing to the pressures and pitfalls that surrounded her, she would emerge as a symbol of empowerment and self-determination. Sarah Rector's story, as you will soon find out, challenges us to consider how circumstances beyond our control can shape our destinies, and how, in the face of adversity, one can rise to claim their rightful place in the world. It also, very most importantly, opens our crying eyes, minds, and searching souls to the diverse earthbound possibilities of nature's grace, boundless greatness, and unpredictable endowments of the wealths and fortunes surrounding each and every one of us out there under the sun, looking up in hope and praying for a better day, in spite of all the odds, whatever tribulations, and unwinding challenges. Hope is always close. God is always there, watching your every move. Let that sink in. In this video segment, we will be examining the thrilling story of Sarah Rector, pointing our searchlight on how their evil plans turned her into a millionaire by the tender age of 11. Now to the story. Sarah Rector's story tells of a black triumph born out of the ashes of the black struggle and survival. It is a story of fortune and wealth and is unique for its time. Rector was born to Joseph and Rose Rector on March 3, 1902, in a two-room cabin near Twine, Oklahoma, on Muskogee Creek Indian allotment land. Both Joseph and Rose had enslaved Creek ancestry, and both of their fathers fought with the Union Army during the Civil War. After the Civil War, the U.S. government declared freedmen, such as the Rectors, citizens of the respective tribes in which they had been enslaved. Sarah Rector was thus both black and an enrolled member of the Creek tribe. The 1887 Dawes General Allotment Act, also known as the Dawes Severalty Act, stripped Native people of their land rights as the U.S. government attempted to restrict indigenous lands and transfer property to white settlers. Simultaneously, the Dawes Act sought to impose a system of individual property rights upon tribes, as U.S. government officials identified previous tribal, communal property as uncivilized. Government officials would survey tribal land, divide it into allotments, and ultimately disperse much of it to white settlers through the sale of what they deemed as excess tribal land. Only those individuals who accepted an allotment, or plot, were entitled to U.S. citizenship. The Dawes Act, however, did not initially apply to the so-called 5 civilized tribes, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole, who were exempt through previous treaties. At the turn of the century, however, Oklahoma was transitioning from Indian territory to state status, and the U.S. government sought further land for white settlers. The Curtis Act of 1898 amended the Dawes Act to include tribes residing in Oklahoma, breaking up tribal governments and their communal lands in Indian territory. Following the end of the Civil War, these freedmen had been declared citizens of the respective tribes in which they had been enslaved. As such, their descendants were each entitled to a plot of land equal in size to the allotted plots of non-enslaved, enrolled tribal members. U.S. government involvement resulted in individual Native freedmen, including Rector and her siblings, each receiving the regulatory allotment of 160 acres. Therefore, Sarah Rector and other 4,407 black children living in the Creek Nation were able to have been allocated lands in eastern Oklahoma, as the actual distribution of lands lasted from 1898 until 1906. Like most other dealings the government had with indigenous Americans, it was not entirely honest. The land allotments were usually rocky and unsuitable for farming, while the more arable lands were sold to white settlers. Sarah's land, totaling 160 acres, was valued at a mere $556.50, roughly $15,000 today. However, the Curtis Act opened up surplus lands to white settlers for purchase, and approximately 90 million acres were stripped from tribes and made available to whites. The federal government, unsurprisingly, pushed what was thought to be the least valuable land upon tribal members. This land was rocky and largely unsuitable for crops. If only the government had realized the amount of oil that rested underneath many of those undesirable allotments, including Sarah Rector's, her narrative would have looked very different. There's a popular expression that says, "When life gives you lemons, make a lemonade." For Rector, her lemons were the plot of land she was gifted, and her lemonade was oil, although it took years after receiving the land to discover its actual value. Rector's family struggled for years about what to do with the land they were allotted. The land given to black people was often unmanageable. Rector's plot was filled with rocks and poor soil where nothing would grow. The desolate land was costly to maintain, and Rector's father had to pay yearly taxes of $30, which is the equivalent of about $1,000 today. This was a burden that became so great that Joseph attempted to sell Sarah's land, but was blocked from doing so by state law, which forbade the sale of lands belonging to minors. Ironically, this government prohibition proved later on to be the family's greatest blessing. Notwithstanding, since he could not sell the land, Joseph Rector decided to lease it out to a Pittsburgh oil company. At the turn of the 20th century, the Indian Territory was the country's biggest oil producer. After Oklahoma earned statehood in 1907, the new state continued to draw drillers to the area, hoping to get lucky. Primarily to generate enough revenue to pay the $30,000 annual tax bill, Rector's father took a step, which unknowingly to him was the gateway to his 11-year-old daughter, becoming the youngest African-American millionaire. In February 1911, Rector's father would lease her allotment to the Devonian Oil Company of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. However, in 1913, everything changed. After Rector's father leased the land to the oil company, an oil driller, B.B. Jones, hit what was known as a gusher. This oil pool produced an abundant amount of oil, approximately 2,500 barrels a day. When this happened, Rector started to receive about $300 per day, and in October of that year, she received royalties of $11,567. According to Anita Arnold of Oklahoma City's Black Liberated Arts Center, the allotment given to Sarah seemed pretty worthless on the surface.
The land they gave to Sarah was so sandy and rocky, her father just despaired because nothing would grow on it, and he had to pay taxes on it to the tune of around $30 a year, which should be in the neighborhood of $1,000 today.
This, Anita had said, and she isn't finished just yet.
So, in order to be up and doing in the payment of the taxes, he signed a lease with an oil company, and that's when they found all this oil. Sarah had one of the largest oil pools on her property ever, and so she went basically from rags to riches overnight. News of her wealth spread throughout the world, and she was getting marriage proposals from mostly white men, and she was just 11 years old.
And then, boom, Sarah Rector's wealth would suddenly become the subject of media attention. The Kansas City Star, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Tulsa World, the Oklahoma City Daily Oklahoman, the Muskogee Time-Democrat, the Cleveland Advocate, the Indianapolis Freeman, name it, you just name it. They all came running. All the media of that time. Rector's little black girl has become some new honey bag for them to feast on. And then you'd get to see the sordid, disgusting works of all kinds of racist newspapers, the dark shadows behind every light, spilling all kinds of dirt concerning the personality of Sarah Rector and her humble background, twisting her suddenly acquired status, rising wealth and glamour into some sort of ridicule. And then in no time, there had become so many new descriptions of the little black girl who nature had smiled upon. New descriptions, which became excellent tools for the white media to keep running their business on a daily basis and feeling useful for as long as it lasts. Descriptions championed in news headlines, front page articles, name it. Sarah Rector became a sensation everywhere. A headline in the Washington Post once wrote, "Oil made Pickaninny rich." The article even described Rector as an orphan, crude, black, and uneducated, yet worth more than $4 million, which couldn't be further from the truth. Another newspaper post has said in its front page article, Sarah Rector, with an income of $15,000 a month, is just getting used to sleeping in a bed. Until the last few weeks, she has slept on a pallet on the floor of a shack, together with several other little Rectors. I cannot even go on reading this, and sadly, there were so many more like it. However, with racist media coverage from white publications, Rector began facing threats, racism, sexism, and everything in between. One thing worked in her favor, though, the black press. As news of Rector's wealth traveled across the globe, the Chicago Defender inspired black activists to come to Rector's rescue through their coverage of her story. Historian and praised sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois even wrote to the Rector family's local judge on June 6, 1914, in the girl's defense, according to KGOU, a broadcast and online news organization with a formidable media presence around the globe. It was said that because of her age as a minor, Rector hadn't inherited any wealth yet, but once she did, her family says she was living lavishly. She had chickens, cows, calves, and stuff like that, said Rector's niece, Deborah Brown. Rector owned Cadillac cars and did whatever else she wanted with her millions. However, the law at the time required full-blooded Indians, black adults, and children who were citizens of Indian Territory with significant property and money to be assigned well-respected white guardians. Thus, as soon as Sarah began to receive this windfall, there was pressure to change her guardianship from her parents to a local white resident and family acquaintance named T.J. Porter. Her allotment subsequently became part of the Cushing Drumright oil field. Amazingly, as news of Rector's wealth spread worldwide, she received requests for loans, money gifts, and marriage proposals, though she was only 11 years old. Kathleen Watkins is an Oklahoma City playwright whose works focus on little-known aspects of African-American history. In 2018, she wrote a play about Rector called Brown-Skinned Rich Girl. Kathleen remembers having a strong emotional reaction when she first learned about Sarah's story.
It got to my heart because I can only imagine being that age, 11 years old, and being told I have all of this money and not really understanding any of it. I mean, within her family as well as with people in the community, what that must have been like. And then when people began to come from all over to see this little black girl, it must have been so scary for her.
That was Watkins sharing her thoughts on what it feels like to be 11 years old with all that enormous wealth, which was Rector's age at the time. Due to her wealth, the Oklahoma legislature in 1913 made an effort to have her declared an honorary white, allowing her the benefits of elevated social standing, such as riding in a first-class car on the trains. In 1914, an African-American journal, the Chicago Defender, began to take an interest in Rector, just as rumors began that she was a white immigrant who was being kept in poverty. The newspaper published an article claiming mismanagement by the white guardians of her estate. This caused national African-American leaders, such as Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, to become concerned about her welfare. In June 1914, a special agent for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, James C. Waters Jr., sent a memo to Du Bois regarding her situation. Waters had been corresponding with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the United States Children's Bureau over concerns regarding the mismanagement of Rector's estate. He wrote of her white financial guardian, which reads thus:
"Is it not possible to have her cared for in a decent manner and by people of her own race, instead of by a member of a race which would deny her and her kind the treatment accorded a good yard dog?"
This prompted Du Bois to establish the Children's Department of the NAACP, which investigated claims of white guardians who were suspected of depriving black children of their land and wealth. Washington also intervened to help the Rector family. In October of that same year, 1914, she was enrolled in the Children's School, a boarding school at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, headed by Washington. Upon graduation, she attended the institute. Rector was already a millionaire by the time she had turned 18 in 1920. She owned stocks, bonds, a boarding house, businesses, and a 2,000-acre piece of prime river bottomland. Despite her wealth, Rector faced many challenges. She was still a young girl and had to navigate the complexities of being a member of a Native American tribe during a time when the government was trying to assimilate indigenous people into mainstream American culture. She also faced discrimination because of her race, even though she was one of the wealthiest people in the country. More seriously, Sarah had to look over her shoulder more than once since fame and fortune had been foisted upon her. Now, rumors circulated that she was in grave danger at school. Schemers, it was said, had arrived in Alabama in a plot to kidnap Sarah. A group of Tuskegee students formed a regiment of guards to keep her safe. Tecumseh Bush, an athletic fellow student who had come from Waco, Texas, took responsibility to lead the group of young bodyguards. However exhilarating it had been to become rich overnight, it was also terrifying, especially for a black child who was often left vulnerable by laws and policies. Sarah did not have to look far to find nightmare-inducing examples of what could be in store. There had been another windfall in Taft that had belonged to Stella and Herbert Sells. The two black children's allotments, which were in the same region as Sarah's, had also produced geysers. In the spring of 1911, as the family slept, a package bomb exploded under their house, and as it was engulfed in flames, horrified neighbors watched helplessly as the children were incinerated. The bombing had been a conspiracy led by a real estate developer who had plotted to fabricate a deed to the children's allotment. The children had been seen as easy targets. Stella Sells had been around Sarah's age, and it's likely that the two girls knew each other. Now it could be Sarah Rector's turn. To protect Rector's interests, her parents decided to move the family to Kansas City, Missouri, where they could live a more private life while investing her money in real estate. Thus, she left Tuskegee and, with her entire family, moved to Kansas City, Missouri, where she purchased a house on 12th Street. By the time she moved to Kansas City in her late teens, Sarah Rector's net worth was estimated to be greater than $1 million, over $28 million today, spread between oil fields, 2,000 acres of farmland in Oklahoma, and investments in numerous businesses in Kansas City. Her story spread throughout the national news, with both black and white papers dubbing her the richest Negro girl in the world. Soon after moving to Kansas City, when she was 18, she married local businessman Kenneth Campbell in 1920. The wedding was a very private affair, with only her mother and Campbell's paternal grandmother present. The couple had 3 sons, Kenneth Jr., born 1925, Leonard, born 1926, and Clarence, born 1929. Her marriage to Campbell ended in 1930, and in 1934, she married William Crawford, a restaurant owner. As expected, Rector did enjoy her wealth, with a comfortable life and a taste for fine clothing and cars. She hosted lavish parties and entertained celebrities such as Count Basie and Duke Ellington. Much was publicized about her extravagant spending on luxuries. But despite publicity and criticisms about her extravagant spending, her investments and wealth continued to accrue throughout the 1920s. Deborah Jean Brown, a niece of Rector's, expressed,
"She lived a life of luxury. She had money coming in and she did whatever she pleased with it."
Donna Brown Tompkins, another of Rector's nieces, stated,
"I remember the fancy cars she had. Big fancy Cadillacs. I remember her coming to the house and they'd play cards and sit around and have fun. They would close Emery, Bird, and Thayer downtown, because we, African Americans, couldn't go in there and try on clothes. But they closed it down for her to shop."
Despite what people may have thought about her personal spending, Rector also used her wealth to support various causes, including the NAACP and the Tuskegee Institute. She also helped fund a local hospital and a church in her hometown of Taft, Oklahoma. Unfortunately, she lost most of her wealth during the Great Depression from 1929 to 1939, which was a severe global economic downturn that affected many countries across the world, and she moved out of her mansion on 12th Street to 2440 Brooklyn Avenue. Rector would later pass away on July 22, 1967, from a stroke at the age of 65. Her remains were buried in the city cemetery of her hometown of Taft. Since then, the home on 12th Street has had multiple different owners and tenants, such as a funeral home and office space for the 12th Street Heritage Development Corporation, and now sits vacant. However, United Intercity Services, UICS, a local organization that works with communities across the Kansas City metro area, has been working to restore the Rector Mansion in hopes of preserving her legacy. UICS has applied for historical and cultural preservation grants to aid the restoration of the home, with hopes of converting it into a cultural center, museum, or economic incubator. Much like when she was young, it is said, the media continues to misrepresent Rector even after her death. According to Rector's family, even the Smithsonian has displayed pictures of Rector who aren't really hers. The remarkable events of Sarah Rector's life had taken place in the faithful year of 1913. But even up till date, people still talk about it, they won't stop. People are still awed by the storming twist of fate that transformed her life from so tender an age. Such grace, it never ceases to beat one's wild imagination. Indeed, such miracles only happen once in a lifetime. In this year, 2024, which is just passing, there's been talks about making a movie to tell the true story of her life. The film, which is slated to be released in the year 2025, will be called Sarah's Oil. In closing, the story of Sarah Rector's life serves as a reminder that even in a world where individuals may attempt to manipulate or take advantage of others, it is possible to rise above and create one's own destiny. Rather than being defined by the evil plans of those who had sought to take advantage of her situation, Sarah leveraged her newfound wealth to secure a better future for herself and her family. She became a symbol of empowerment, demonstrating that even in a world rife with inequality, one can navigate the complexities of life and emerge victorious. That brings us to the end of yet another interesting video segment. Did you happen to learn a thing or two? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section, as we are always delighted to pick from them. Support our works also by hitting that like button in front of you. Share video with families and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and kindly subscribe to stay tuned in always, whilst you help in building the rising membership of this channel. We are honored to have you here with us. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.